Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining again today for navigating work and grief together. I'm Jody Lavoie, founder of the Grief Company and Widows in the Workplace. And we come together on this show to explore grief and how major life events like death and divorce and caring for ailing parents all affect us personally and our performance at work. And not only do we talk about it, but we give you strategies and tips on how to do it better. And I'm so fortunate today because I have my guest and friend, Jennifer O'Brien, who is a death literacy advocate. But not only that, she wears so many different hats. Many of you may know her as the hospice doctor's widow. She's an author. She's an interim healthcare CEO. She's a textile designer, and she is the biggest care boss that is out there. And not only that, she's appeared in the HuffPost, Thrive Global, the New York Times, and so many more. So I am thrilled that we have her here today. We're going to talk about conversations people don't like to talk about, but that are so important. Caregiving and end of life, because guess what, everybody? 1 in 5 people at least are caregiving today. And it's likely more. That's 20% of the US population. And that is a big number. Now, I always like to start with a fun fact, everybody. So my friend Jennifer, she relishes rejection, and maybe she'll talk about that a little bit today. But she's a scarf designer, and I am wearing one of her really cool designs, and you can't see it all here, but I love it. And I was able to meet her in real life for brunch. It's been way too long, Jennifer. So I hope you get back to Chicago again soon. So welcome. Thanks for being here.
It's my pleasure, Jody. I'm absolutely thrilled to be talking with you. I admire your work and felt honored to get the invitation.
Thank you. And we've known each other for, gosh, 2 or 3 years now.
Yeah.
And this community of those that support the bereaved, whether it's anticipatory or, very in the thick of it, is small yet mighty. And I'm really thrilled that we were able to connect. And I've learned so much about you that I want all of them to know about you. And so maybe you can kind of start at the beginning, because I don't think you went to college to be a hospice doctor's widow. So tell us a little bit about what led you, I guess, to this line of work that you're in today.
Yeah, so I actually lost my only sibling. His name was David when I was 18 and he was 13. And that was in 1983. And we did not do grief well in 1983. And yet he died following an automobile accident, and that really shaped me. I learned at that young age that, at the end of life comes death. Sometimes it is sudden and other times it's not, but it comes every time, and you lose people you love. And I just got that lesson really early on. Not quite 20 years after David died, my mom got a pancreatic cancer, and I was her caregiver for the 5 weeks that she lived from following the diagnosis. And then many years after my mother died, I met and fell in love with Bob Lemberg. He was my husband. We fell in love and we got married and we had this just beautiful life. He was a hospice and palliative care physician at our University Med Center here in Little Rock, Arkansas. I've been in healthcare my entire career on the sort of business administrative side. We just had this lovely, lovely little life that was just so quaint and filled with love. He, of course, had a great professional perspective on end of life and before and after that. And I had this very personal perspective, having lost my mother and my brother at that point. So it was a part of our relationship. And of course, every night at the dinner table, he would share stories about what was happening at work. And he was always, it's a great honor to be involved in such an intimate and difficult time in people's lives. And he felt that way. And I felt like I wanted to support him in that. And he was diagnosed with a renal clear cell carcinoma that was already metastatic to lots of places throughout his body and was already at a stage 4. And we then basically had to turn that wisdom of his and that experience of both of ours kind of inward to ourselves. He lived for 22 months following his diagnosis. And Bob and I very thoroughly prepared for his death and my survivorship, very thoroughly. And
And
that
that is
was
unusual, Jennifer, because
totally
most
unusual.
people are not doing that. So,
Yes, yes, no,
uh,
that's exactly right. It is totally unusual. And of course, also unusual was that we had these insights that lots of people don't have because they're not palliative care professionals and they haven't been on that side of things much. And so while Bob was sick, I turned to what gives me great comfort, which is creating. And I started this art journal. It's if you're wondering what an art journal is, you're not alone. I create these collages. In my case, they're digital collages. And then I write the journal notes kind of on top of the collage. And I started this shortly after Bob was diagnosed. I'm fairly certain Bob never knew that I was doing the journal.
mhm.
It was purely a self-care effort on my part. It was private, it was self-care, but it was important to me to document some of the stuff that we were going through, that was Bob's wisdom, that I didn't want that to get lost. So I kept going with the journal for a while after he died, at which point I was doing an interim CEO position for a large multi-specialty practice. And one of the doctors there, a neurologist, was in the process of diagnosing 3 patients with ALS, which is a terminal diagnosis. And I then brought my journal. I had printed it using a vacation photo book software. I made an actual book out of it, and I brought it into this doctor. He took it home, came back the next day and said, "You're not getting your journal back. I will be loaning it to these 3 patients, moreover to their spouses. And you need to figure out how to get that thing published because it would really help a lot of people." And
Wow.
that was just incredibly compelling, right? That Jody, from your loss and from the work you're doing now, and several of us in this situation know that you can tell when the weight of the grief gets manageable by the notion that you start to want to help others, right? Like it's at that point that you realize you are starting to learn how to live with this weight and carry it gracefully. And so anyway, that was it came at his words came at exactly the right time. I was at that stage where I was like, oh wow, I could actually help some other people. And so I went to work on finding a publisher, did that, and the book came out as The Hospice Doctor's Widow, and in February of 2020, so almost 5 years ago. And I have recently issued a second edition version of it that I'm also really pleased with. But
So
it the
let's pause there for a second,
Yeah,
Jennifer. So, because you've said so much,
I know, I'm
I don't want
sorry.
to lose train of thought. So, one, the whole, you are a creative person by design, and that was a way for you to heal. There are a lot of people out there who aren't necessarily declaring themselves creative people, but yet that creative process of whether it's pen to paper, ink to paper, computer, whatever it is to get those feelings and thoughts out of your head into whatever medium, that's just healing and helpful. So, will you talk a little bit about how creativity helps with healing?
I would love to. So in my case, it's art journaling. It's these collages that sometimes I print on organic cotton, like the one you have around your neck, and sometimes print onto paper and so forth. But there's a lot of different ways that people express their creativity, no question about it. If you are interested in the art journaling, on my website, I do have a free download of 5 art journaling prompts that will just kind of get you, thinking about what you incorporate and what you might use to work through your creativity, your grief through creativity kind of thing. But yes, it's almost impossible for me not to create. It started with black and white photography few years after my brother died. When I took my mother's ashes up to my brother's grave to scatter them, that's when I was introduced to art journaling. I went to a little workshop. I grew up in Santa Fe, New Mexico, so my family is buried in Talpa, New Mexico, and so I have, I frequently go to this relatively creative place. But creativity can be expressed. Lots of women express their creativity through cooking. And that's unfortunate, because if they're caring for parents or a spouse, there will be a period of time while their person gets sicker that the person doesn't eat, right? Part of the decrescendo of life is to stop taking in food and beverage and so forth. And that can be a tough point. Um, However, I will say that when you do lose your person and you start to feel some of the energy that you want to work through some stuff, I always recommend, especially to widows, that you go ahead and do the cooking, but find a local women's shelter or someplace, right, where you can bring the stuff, because that's the biggest complaint. I am no cook, so it's not an issue for me, but I know a lot of women do express their creativity through cooking and feel a real sense of loss when they lose their care recipient and there's no one to cook for. So I always recommend, yeah, find the local shelter or whatever it is, whatever you want to choose, your church or some sort of event, and do the cooking for that, just to give yourself the outlet, and then of course to contribute it to, others.
And
But
there's so much tie to that because, yes, you're
so much.
creating in the meal you're preparing, but there's usually memories and other things tied to the particular dish. You prepared it with a certain, maybe your person that you're caregiving for, and that's their favorite, and it's a way to express and share your love for this person outwardly to others, and
Yes.
it's beautiful.
Yeah, yeah, no, highly, highly recommend whatever it is. If it's Zen drawing, it's doodling, it's whatever it is that is giving you some peace, do it. Do
Mhm.
it. And don't, you don't have to show it to anybody. You don't have to publish it like I did, there are pros and cons to that. But yeah, yeah, so absolutely carve out some time for that creativity,
Did I hear
definitely.
you earlier? Did you say you were working when you were caregiving for Bob too?
No, not when I was caregiving for Bob. Well, of course, it is incredible amount of
It
work,
is, yes.
but I
And
was not working outside the home. I was one of the fortunate people who was able to take time away from working outside the home to focus on caring for him.
I appreciate you bringing that up because you were working.
Yes,
You were working as a caregiver.
right.
And and society doesn't view that as a job, as a, okay, maybe a role, but it's after you're working, mothering, doing all the other things, you're also a caregiver. And the amount of time and money and resources and emotion and all of that that goes into caregiving that's just not recognized in society, at the workplace, and all of these other things is wrong.
Yeah, yeah,
Wrong.
it's terribly wrong. It's terribly wrong. Yeah, and in fact, that was the sort of genesis for what is my second book, which just came out a few weeks ago, and it's called Care Boss. There it is. Care Boss, Leadership Strategies and Resources for Family Caregivers. So, I had done in my Make a Living career, I have done the interim CEO position or interim leadership in some way position for a number of different medical practices or organizations, and have done interim leadership now for 20 years in healthcare. And then, of course, as I mentioned, I was caregiver to my mom, I was caregiver to my husband, and most recently, caregiver to long distance caregiver to my father, with whom I had a somewhat strained relationship. So, having done the interim leadership numerous times, having done the caregiver, family caregiver role numerous times, it occurred to me that the family caregiver position is indeed a leadership position itself, with an ambitious mission and vision, and a lot of hard work that you end up doing, not just the leadership scope of things, but many times the day-to-day nitty-gritty stuff. And so out of that was born Care Boss, this book that ideally gives family caregivers all sorts of my leadership experience, specific how-tos, broader brushstroke kind of stuff, and I'm really pleased with it. And it just came out and it's getting out into the world, and the feedback I'm receiving is just incredibly positive. But for those of you, so one of the things that I think is important, just backing up here, is the definition of family caregiver, right? That let's start with that it simply means that sometime in the last 12 months, you helped out an adult, not children. This is not I don't have kids. Bob didn't have kids. This is not about parenting, but you helped out someone 18 or older. You may have driven them to a doctor's appointment. You may have attended the doctor's appointment to be a second set of ears. You may pay their bills for them because they don't do online bill payment or whatever. They may or may not be living with you. They may or may not be blood related to you. But if you have done any of that work on behalf of someone 18 or older in the last 12 months, you are by definition a caregiver. And I think the word that's the definition. Somehow the word gets kind of forgotten. People sort of shrug and say, well, I'm the daughter. Of course I'm going to do it. I'm the wife, I'm the husband. And they just see that as part and parcel, their job, their vow. But the truth is, it is a massive undertaking. It may start with a couple of doctor's appointments or bill paying or keeping, going over and cleaning up the house a couple times a week. But it grows in intensity until, the point at which the person needs more and more care, and then ultimately needs end of life family caregiving and dies. So it's a huge job. The average duration of family caregiving is 4.5 years. right?
Whoa.
That's a long
That's a long
job.
time.
Yeah, that's a long
Yeah.
job. And if you're working in a make a living, in a workplace and doing the caregiving simultaneously, keeping in mind, or if you're managing people who are doing that, it's important to keep that in mind, that duration. And of course, at the end of the caregiving, most typically is because the care recipient dies, not because everything magically gets better and right, everyone rides off into the sunset. So, and the other thing to keep in mind is that if the care recipient lives with the caregiver, they are spending 37.4 hours a week caregiving, right, on that job. So in addition to the workplace work that my employees have, many of them are going home to a second full-time job of taking care of their person. And if they don't live with their care recipient, I believe it's 15.7 hours a week. And so that's almost a part-time position, right? And then, you get into things like a long distance caregiving, and you get into the fact that a lot of the caregiving stuff that we do must be done during business hours, right? Taking someone to the doctor, making doctor's appointments, calling about insurance claims. These are all things, right, that can't always do. I mean, sometimes, there are portals and so forth, but for the most part, we are still in a business hours situation with that kind of thing. So I've got, two jobs that are really vying for my attention. And make no mistake, um, managers, make no mistake, as wonderful, as important as the mission and vision of the workplace is, it will never, nor should it ever, supersede the mission and the vision of taking care of someone you love. It just, pales in comparison. And the sooner we all kind of realize that, I think the better off we are. Uh,
And if we go back to the number at the beginning, if at least 20% of, now we're bringing it to the workplace here, of your employees are caregiving, that's a big number.
Big number.
And so, how can you, as manager leader, keep that in your purview when it comes to support? Whether that just be emotional, conversational support, but workload, after hours obligations, all those kind of, why aren't they answering the emails at 8 p.m. and 9 p.m. and all of those things. It's This balance is important because, Jennifer, you were right. At the end of the day, it's the mission of the person they love and are caring for that is the most important.
Right.
So do you really want to lose that big percentage of your workforce if you're not helping somehow
Right.
to help them navigate it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, and I think that's exactly right. I think if you are a manager and you've never been a caregiver, I have another resource on my website. Um, Either pick up the book Care Boss or go to my website and download. I have a position description for family caregiver. As someone who has been in a leadership role in healthcare, I found myself asking the question, what if I had to hire for the position of family caregiver? What would that position description look like?
Hmm.
And I created a position description and I vetted it through a number of both uh, family and professional caregivers, and I feel very good about this position description. So if you're looking to sort of broaden your horizons and understand what 20% of your workforce is going through, and it may be more than 20%, but at least 20% is my guess, then definitely download that position description to see what that job entails, and basically, what you're sharing your employee with,
Yeah.
because it's a big one. It's huge. Yeah, yeah, definitely. And it takes up a lot of time and it goes on for quite a while.
And you started with how organized and meticulous you and Bob were with all of your end of life plans. And I don't know the numbers, but that is rare. And so for people, A, that are not at that end of life place or nearing that, how do you talk about it early and now, everyone? Because people die suddenly young, people die suddenly older. You don't know. So make sure your ducks are in a row. But it's a hard conversation. Like, how do you do that?
It is a very hard conversation. It gets harder when someone gets sick.
Mm.
So yes, start it before someone gets sick. It is not a single conversation. It is many conversations over time. It is a lot of listening. Um, I firmly so there's a couple of little things, not, and they're not little, of course, but they're contained, they're doable. Um, I highly recommend that anyone with kids getting ready to graduate high school and go away to college, that for the 18th birthday, setting advanced healthcare directives is an absolute must. At your kids at 18 become adults, and if something happens to them where they cannot speak for themselves from a healthcare perspective, um, you need to know where they stand, because that is such an individual thing. We're about 50-50 on the question in this country, on the question of, if you had a bad diagnosis with difficulty managing your day-to-day activities, the question being, would you want to simply be kept comfortable until you die, or would you want every possible life extending measure? We are, in this country, we are about 50-50 on that. And it knows there's no ethnicity, there's no political, like within the same family, one person wants every life extending measure and one person says, oh, no, 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 I don't need all that. Just keep me comfortable and let me go. And so these conversations are essential. And I think they start at a young age. I firmly believe that we should have death education in high school. I think we'd all be better off for it. But within your own household, that's one thing, is starting with your 18-year-olds and getting their advanced directives. And of course, if you're encouraging your kids to do it, you need to have done it yourself.
Mhm.
The
And
second
Jennifer,
big,
I just did this. I have three kids, two in college, one out of college. I had these conversations. We actually sat and read all of because they're signing this. So I want them to understand what they're signing. And it really prompted interesting conversations because I had one child that's like, yeah, I don't want all of those things, just make me comfortable. And the other child said, heck to the yes. Yes, I want all sorts of. So had we not had that conversation, and it's important. So, and because of you, you keep planting that seed. I'm like, I've got to do this. I've got to do this. And I made it the day, and it's easy. There are places online that make this super simple. You don't need
yes,
to hire expensive attorneys and things.
no, certainly not for those,
For simple.
not for those conversations. The other thing that I strongly recommend, first of all, thank you for that feedback, because honestly, I talk about this stuff all the time, and sometimes I get tired of hearing myself talk about it. So to know that it's getting through
Yeah.
is absolutely just the greatest reward I could possibly receive. So thank you so much for that story about your girls, because that means a lot. The other thing is in your smartphone, there is a place to put a medical ID and instructions for an in case of emergency. And there's a way to set it up so that even when your phone is locked, someone like, say, a social worker working in an ER can get to that information on your smartphone to know what medications you're on, what blood type you have, who your advanced, who your healthcare proxy is, all these sorts of things that's right there in that device that we all carry with us at all times. And so it will likely be with us when we, have a stroke or an accident or whatever it is and end up in a situation where we need the person with the decision-making power to be contacted.
I
So
wish that was promoted more. So thank you for
I
bringing that up
know, I
because
know.
yeah, it's like, oh, here's your medical thing. And that, but
Yeah, I
it's
just
so
noticed a
important.
couple months ago, Apple put out in one of their newsletters, they referenced medical ID, and I was like, damn, it's about time. Um, Both of these things, the advanced healthcare directives and the medical ID, how to put that in your phone, are in yet another free download I have on my website called the At Peace Toolkit, a guide to being at peace with end of life. So, and that also to answer one of your earlier questions, which I don't even know if I've answered, that also has some conversation starter ideas in that document as well. Um, Circling back to the answer to that question, if you have not done those things, and someone is ill and you are taking care of them. It is a harder series of conversations after we get a diagnosis because when we're all healthy, we're having those conversations in the abstract. When someone gets sick, right, the reality is just hitting us right in the face that that person, we're probably going to outlive the person who has gotten the diagnosis, and it's very painful. So it's great to have, which Bob and I had, those touchstone conversations well before either one of us got sick, so that when he did get sick, I could say, you know, you used to talk about this. Do you still feel that way? And he would say, yes. Or he would say, no, I'm going to try this. I'm going to try this treatment or whatever it is,
Mm,
which brings me back to a common myth about things like healthcare directives are that you can't change your mind. You can absolutely change your mind. Like I said, it's multiple conversations. It's not just one conversation. So if someone does change their mind, um, talk about it, you know, sort through what it is that's altering their thoughts and opinions on that. And then if you're the proxy, adjust to that because it's all about their wishes. But if you get to the point where someone's already sick, or if you are at that point, a question that I like a lot, well, two things. A statement. I like to tell people I love you and I want to be able to express that love for you up until and beyond your last breath.
mm,
Um, and so that tells them in no uncertain terms, in my mind, that I want to have these discussions so that I can hear their wishes and I can carry them out. There is no greater honor on this planet. I can tell you, I have done it many times now with loved ones. There is no greater honor, there is no greater expression of your love and devotion to someone than to listen to what they want in terms of their end of life and disposition wishes and to carry those out for this
mm.
person that you love. It's just one of the most difficult and yet most beautiful expressions of love that we have. So that's the other thing I sometimes offer as a question is, you know, what do you wish for me after you have died? This can be a really helpful conversation about, you know, just in general, you know, do you want me to get married again? Do you, whatever, do you want, or if it's your parents, you know, what are their wishes for you after they die? You know, so that you can know what those are, and it can stimulate a conversation about some practical things to get ready. Um, because I will tell you, Bob and I did very thoroughly prepare for his death and my survivorship, and it continues to this day, and yesterday was the 8-year mark. It continues to this day that his love for me is expressed in the preparation that we did. So, you know, we did preparation so that I would easily get his VA benefits. He worked for the Veterans Administration for a long time. And there are survivor benefits that I get, including my health insurance. And so every time I schedule a doctor's appointment, I have a reminder of how much Bob loved me and the care that he took to make sure these things were in place for me. There's wonderful examples of that, but you do have to be willing to talk about it. A doctor that I worked with, an oncologist that I worked with years ago, used to ask, used to say to patients at every oncology visit, he would say, "We hope for the best and we prepare for the worst." And he would say that at every visit. And I think that's super important. It's a mantra of sorts. It's an and, not an or, right? Remission of cancer, cure of cancer does not negate end of life. I mean, you're still going to die at the end of your life, even if you get that cancer cured, right? So it's never a waste of time to have discussions about your end of life wishes. And he just basically would bring both of those up, our hope and our preparation. And I think if as a caregiver, you're able to talk about that, our hope and our preparation, you will find that you focus on both, you balance both. The best and the worst change over time. When Bob first got diagnosed, the best was a cure, right? Was a targeted therapy that would have hit his cancer directly and would have been, would have cured him. That was the best. And the worst was him dying. But shortly after, when it became clear that he didn't have that kind of cancer, the best became, more quality time together, and the worst became suffering. That he would be in pain, that that he would suffer. And so anyway, I think you're doing absolutely both. When you're having those discussions, and you can say, I feel like we're long on the hope thing and we haven't done much for the preparation. Or conversations are getting really heavy on the preparation side, and yet let's revisit what we're hoping for at this point. We're hoping for, more time cuddling together, more time, whatever it is. So anyway, that's my guidance for if you've saved this. And there's some additional thoughts in Care Boss about these conversations and this preparation.
Jennifer, I could keep talking to you for an hour here. But I love the words you're ending us on: hope and preparation, and so much beauty in all that you were talking about. And people, I think, frequently forget that there is beauty in being able to be a part of this support and connection during an end of life time. And so we didn't say your website, so please say your website. I want everybody to know how to find you.
Sure. My website is Jennifer, Jennifer, OBRIEN.com. JenniferAObrien.com.
Perfect.
Yep.
So appreciate you being here. And I know everyone out there listening does as well. Very enlightening. And I hope everybody leaves and takes some action, because Jennifer gave some pretty specific. If the only thing you do is go to your smartphone and update your medical ID, that is great. That is
And do it with your family, right?
do it with your
Make
family.
sure everybody in your family, all your friends do it too.
That is right. Thank you so much, Jennifer.
My pleasure,
Bye-bye.
Jody.